My own son locked me away so he could sell my house behind my back. Michael showed up with flowers, a smile, and a lie. Said he was taking me on a tour. Just a look-see, he promised. But the moment I stepped into Sunny Pines Senior Living, I knew something was wrong. The staff greeted me like a new resident, not a visitor. By the time I asked for my keys, they were already in his car, and he was halfway down the block. He left me there with nothing but a bag his wife had packed without asking, and a fake smile I'll never forget. And that house, the one I built my life in, where I raised him, where I buried my husband's ashes in the garden, he listed it for sale that same afternoon, didn't even tell me. But what Michael didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that I still had one thing left he couldn't touch. My name on the deed, and I was about to use it to outmaneuver him in the one way he'd never see coming. But before we begin, dear, comment under this video where in the world you're watching from today. Now let's start from the beginning. That Thursday morning dawned like any other. I'd watered my peace lily, the one Frank had given me on our 35th anniversary, and was just settling in with my crossword when the doorbell rang. 2 short chimes, the second one lingering as if someone was holding the button down a moment too long. Michael always did that, even as a boy. Some habits never change, even when everything else does. Mom. His smile was wide, warm, the kind that used to make my heart swell with pride. Now it just makes my stomach twist when I remember it. Surprise visit. He held out a bouquet of yellow daisies, my favorites. How calculated that seems now. Michael, what are you doing here on a Thursday? I smoothed down my cardigan, suddenly aware I was still in my house slippers. Is everything all right with Jenny and the kids? Everything's perfect. He stepped inside, kissing my cheek with practiced ease. His cologne was stronger than usual. Was he covering something up? Nervousness, perhaps? I've been thinking about you, that's all. Actually, I want to show you something. A place I found that I think you'll love. I hesitated. Today? I wasn't expecting to go anywhere. It's just a quick tour, Mom. You'll be back for your shows tonight, I promise. He glanced around the living room, eyes skimming over the photographs of Frank, of Michael himself growing up, of the grandchildren. Was he cataloging them already, planning where they'd go? You don't even need to pack anything. It's just a look-see. That should have been my first warning. Who takes their mother somewhere without suggesting she bring her purse, at least? But when your child looks at you with those eyes, the same eyes that once pleaded for one more bedtime story or help with math homework, something primal switches off your suspicion. Well, all right then. I grabbed my handbag and house keys. Just let me lock up. The drive was pleasant enough. Michael chatted about the kids' soccer games, about Jenny's promotion, about everything except where we were going. I watched familiar streets give way to parts of town I rarely visited anymore. When was the last time I'd been this far from my neighborhood? Frank and I used to drive everywhere, taking weekend trips just because we could. After he died, my world had shrunk, though I'd never admitted that to Michael. Here we are. His voice had that forced cheerfulness, like when he'd bring home C- math tests. Sunny Pines Senior Living. It's brand new. They just finished construction last month. My chest tightened. Senior living? Michael, I'm not looking for a place. I'm perfectly fine in my home. I know, Mom. I just thought you might like to see what's available these days. They have a garden center I knew you'd appreciate. His hand on my elbow was gentle but insistent. as he guided me toward glass double doors emblazoned with a stylized pine tree logo. Inside, everything was beige and mint green, with that distinct institutional cleanliness that tries too hard to mask what it is. A young woman behind the reception desk smiled broadly when we entered. "Mrs. Bennett, we're so pleased you're joining us today." She stepped around the counter with a clipboard. "I'm Kayla, the resident coordinator. We have your suite already." "My suite?" I looked at Michael, confusion mounting. There must be some mistake. I'm just here for a tour. Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, remember we talked about this? About how the house is getting to be too much for you to manage alone?" We had never had such a conversation. Not once. "Mr. Bennett has already completed all the paperwork," Kayla continued, oblivious to my growing horror. "We can help you get settled right away." "Michael?" My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. "What's going on?" He put his arm around my shoulders, steering me toward a hallway lined with numbered doors. "It's just a trial stay, Mom, to see if you like it. The house needs some repairs anyway, and this way you won't be bothered by the contractors." Lies. All lies. I could see it now in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, in how his fingers tapped nervously against his thigh, a tell he'd had since childhood. "I want to go home," I said firmly, planting my feet. "Give me my keys, please." Michael's face flickered, guilt, frustration, then a practiced patience that made me feel like a difficult child. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your keys are in the car. Let's just see your room first, okay?" But I knew. In that moment, I knew I wouldn't be going home today. "I need my things," I protested, my voice embarrassingly small. "My medications, my clothes." "Jenny packed a bag for you," Michael said too quickly. "It's already in your room." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They had planned this, discussed it, packed for me behind my back. "Mrs. Bennett, would you like some water?" Kayla asked, her trained smile never wavering. I watched through the lobby windows as Michael made his excuses, backing away toward the door. "I'll visit tomorrow, Mom, once you've had time to settle in." "Michael," I called after him, my dignity abandoning me. "Michael, don't do this." But he was already gone, hurrying to his car with my house keys in his pocket. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, watching his silver sedan pull away from the curb, taking my freedom with it. My son had just abandoned me in a nursing home under the guise of love. I spent that first night in Sunny Pines staring at the ceiling, counting water stains that looked like continents on a map I'd never planned to visit. The bed was too soft, the pillow too firm, and the blanket too thin. Nothing felt right. How could it? This wasn't my home. When morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains, I forced myself up. My joints protested more than usual. Stress, probably. Or maybe it was the mattress that seemed designed for someone half my weight. I shuffled to the small attached bathroom, wincing at my reflection. The woman staring back looked older than I remembered, her eyes rimmed with red, her silver hair flattened on one side. "You're not staying," I whispered to her. "This is temporary." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Michael's hasty departure, the pre-packed bag, the staff's complete lack of surprise at my arrival, none of it suggested a short visit. I dressed in clothes I hadn't chosen, brushed my teeth with a toothbrush that wasn't mine, and ventured into the hallway. The corridor buzzed with morning activity, aides pushing medication carts, residents shuffling toward what I assumed was the dining area. I followed the crowd, my stomach growling despite everything. The dining room was bright, at least, with large windows overlooking a courtyard garden. I joined a table where two women were already seated, picking at plates of scrambled eggs and toast. "You're new," one of them observed, not unkindly. "I'm Doris. This is Elaine." "Margaret," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just arrived yesterday." "Against your will?" Elaine asked bluntly, causing Doris to tut with disapproval. I blinked, surprised by her directness. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," she said, buttering her toast with practiced precision. "We've all had that look. Kids decide they know what's best, and suddenly you're here eating institutional eggs." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was something both comforting and horrifying about not being alone in this experience. After breakfast, I approached the nurse's station, where a woman with braided hair was reviewing charts. Her name tag read, Charla. "Excuse me," I began, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering when my son might be coming back. He left rather abruptly yesterday." Charla's smile was genuine, unlike the practiced ones I'd seen from the administrative staff. "Mrs. Bennett, right? Let me check your visitor notes." She tapped at a computer screen. "It looks like Michael has you down for a visit tomorrow afternoon. He mentioned he'd be busy with the realtor today." The realtor. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Realtor," I echoed, gripping the edge of the counter. Something in Charla's expression shifted. Concern, maybe, or the realization she'd said too much. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew. Your son mentioned listing your house yesterday when he completed your intake forms." Yesterday. Not sometime in the future. Not after discussing it with me. Yesterday. "I see," I managed, though my vision had gone slightly blurry around the edges. "And did he happen to mention when the house might be shown?" Charla hesitated, clearly uncomfortable now. "I believe he said something about an open house this weekend, 5 days from now, on Saturday." 5 days. My home of 43 years would be paraded before strangers in 5 days. "Thank you," I said automatically, turning away before she could see the tears threatening to spill. I wandered through unfamiliar hallways until I found a small sitting area near a window. Outside, residents moved slowly through garden paths, some with walkers, others with aides at their elbows. The sun shone brilliantly, warming the glass beneath my fingertips. On any normal day, I'd be in my own garden right now, tending to the hydrangeas Frank and I had planted the year before he died. The magnitude of what was happening crashed over me in waves. Michael hadn't just dropped me off for a visit or even a temporary stay. He was selling my house, my home, from under me. The home where I'd raised him, where I'd nursed Frank through his final illness, where every door frame had pencil marks tracking Michael's childhood height, and he'd done it without even telling me. I sat there as the morning light shifted across the floor, trying to make sense of it all. Had I missed signs that Michael was planning this? Had there been conversations I'd forgotten? No, I might be 70, but my mind was sharp. This betrayal had been calculated and deliberate. As lunchtime approached, I overheard 2 staff members talking just around the corner. "Working all weekend on the Bennett intake. Her son's pushing for a quick transition. Says the open house on Saturday needs to go perfectly." "Isn't that kind of fast? She just got here yesterday." Apparently the market's hot in her neighborhood. He doesn't want to miss the window. I pressed my back against the wall, their words confirming my worst fears. Michael wasn't just selling my house. He was rushing to do it before I could object, before I could find a way home. As the day wore on, I watched the sunset from a bench in the courtyard, surrounded by strangers in a place I never chose. The sky blazed orange and pink, a beautiful sight I wasn't free to walk beneath. I could only sit and watch, contained and controlled, my agency as easily dismissed as yesterday's newspaper. That night, lying in the too-soft bed, I made a decision. I wouldn't just accept this. Somehow I would find a way back home, and Michael would learn that underestimating his mother was the biggest mistake he could have made. I spent the rest of that first night alternating between rage and disbelief. How could my own son do this to me? The same little boy who'd once refused to leave for summer camp because he was worried I'd be lonely without him. When morning came, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, a habit of 40 years, before remembering where I was. The facility-issued cordless phone sat in its charging cradle across the room. I hobbled over, my joints stiff from a restless night on the unfamiliar mattress, and dialed Michael's number with trembling fingers. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. "Hi, you've reached Michael Bennett. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you." "Michael, it's Mom." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I need to speak with you immediately. Please call me back at Sunny Pines." I hung up and waited. An hour passed, then 2. I called again. "Michael, please, we need to talk about what's happening. Call me back." By afternoon, I'd left 4 messages, each more desperate than the last. The final one barely contained my anger. "Michael Bennett, you cannot sell my house without my permission. Call me back this instant." That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I tried again, first thing. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time." I stared at the phone in disbelief. Had he blocked me? My own son had blocked my calls. The realization sent me spiraling. I sank onto the edge of the bed, phone clutched to my chest, and let the tears come. Without a car, without internet access, I'd never bothered learning how to use computers, something I now bitterly regretted. I was completely cut off. The walls of Sunny Pines, with their cheerful beige paint and generic landscape art, felt more like prison bars with each passing hour. When lunchtime came, I couldn't bear the thought of making small talk with strangers, but my growling stomach forced me to the dining room. I took a tray and found a table in the corner, away from the chattering groups of residents who seemed to have accepted this place as their home. I picked at my chicken salad sandwich, fighting back tears that threatened to spill every few minutes. The shame was almost worse than the anger. How could I have been so easily fooled, so trusting, so stupid? "You look like you could use a friend." I glanced up to find a small woman with steel gray hair and large glasses standing beside my table. She leaned on a floral-patterned cane that looked more like an accessory than a necessity. "I'm fine, thank you," I lied, dabbing at my eyes with a napkin. "Hogwash," she said, sitting down across from me without invitation. "I'm Margaret, former head librarian at the county library for 32 years, and I know the look of someone who's been wronged." There was something in her direct gaze that broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, the whole story came tumbling out. Michael's deception, the house being listed, my blocked calls, the open house just days away. Margaret didn't offer empty platitudes or pat my hand sympathetically. Instead, she listened with narrowed eyes, occasionally nodding or asking a sharp question. When I finished, she sat back and tapped her cane thoughtfully against the floor. "So you're not here voluntarily," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I whispered, glancing around to make sure no staff were within earshot. "I never agreed to this. I didn't sign anything." "Are you certain?" Margaret's eyes were keen behind her glasses. "No paperwork at all?" I shook my head. "Michael handled everything. I never saw any forms." A small smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth. "Well, now, that's interesting." "Interesting," I echoed, confused by her reaction. "In my experience," Margaret said, leaning forward, "systems always have loopholes, and people who think they can manipulate those systems often get careless." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Margaret replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that if you didn't sign yourself in, there might be a way to sign yourself out." "But how?" "I have no money, no transportation." "Details," Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "What you need first is information. Know your enemy, know the battlefield." "Michael isn't my enemy," I protested weakly, though the words rang hollow even to my own ears. Margaret fixed me with a look that brooked no argument. "Anyone who steals your agency and your home without consent is, at minimum, an opponent, and opponents can be outmaneuvered." She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket and began jotting notes. "First, we need to understand exactly what paperwork exists with your name on it. Then we need to know the facility's discharge policies." "We?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Margaret looked up, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "Well, I certainly can't let this injustice stand. Besides," she added with a wink, "retirement is dreadfully boring without the occasional covert operation." For the first time in days, I felt something like hope flutter in my chest. Margaret wasn't offering sympathy. She was offering strategy, a way forward, a fight. "Then we find a loophole," she said with a mischievous grin, tapping her notebook decisively. I found myself smiling back, the weight on my shoulders lightening just enough to let me breathe again. Perhaps I wasn't as powerless as I'd thought. Margaret was a woman of action. The very next morning, she appeared at my door before breakfast, her floral cane tapping impatiently against the carpeted hallway. "Recreation hour starts at 10, she announced without preamble. "Meet me in the activity room." "Recreation hour?" I asked, still groggy from another night of fitful sleep. "Computers and tablets are available during scheduled times," Margaret explained. "The staff monitors usage, of course, but they're mostly concerned with keeping residents from visiting inappropriate websites." She winked. "Not stopping us from contacting attorneys." My heart leapt. "You have a plan?" "I have my own tablet," she said, patting her large handbag. "Wi-Fi password is taped to the bulletin board in the activity room. Not very secure, but convenient for our purposes." The next 2 hours crawled by. I picked at my breakfast, too anxious to eat. What if my attorney couldn't help? What if Michael had already gotten me to sign something without realizing it? My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. At precisely 10 o'clock, I slipped into the activity room. Margaret was already there, settled in a corner armchair, partially obscured by a large potted plant. She beckoned me over with a subtle nod. "Sit next to me," she whispered. "I've already got everything set up." I lowered myself into the adjacent chair, my knees protesting after days of inactivity. Margaret passed me her tablet, the screen already open to an email draft. "Do you remember your attorney's email address?" she asked. I nodded, typing in David Harmon's contact information. David had handled the paperwork when I'd refinanced the house 3 years ago. He wasn't a close friend, but he knew me, and more importantly, he knew my property situation. "Keep it brief but urgent," Margaret advised, keeping watch for approaching staff members. "And be specific about what you need to know." My fingers trembled as I composed the message. "David, this is an urgent matter. I've been placed in Sunny Pines Senior Living against my will by my son Michael. He's listed my house for sale without my consent. Open house in 3 days. Need to know, am I still legal owner? What rights do I have? Can he sell without my signature? Please respond ASAP. This is not a joke." I hesitated, then added, "P.S. I'm using a friend's tablet during recreation hour. May not be able to respond immediately." "Good," Margaret murmured, reading over my shoulder. "Now send it and we'll wait." I pressed send, watching the little animation as the message disappeared into the digital ether. Would David even check this email today? Would he take me seriously? "Now what?" I asked, handing the tablet back to Margaret. "Now we wait," she said, slipping the device back into her bag. "And we act normal." Acting normal proved nearly impossible. We played a half-hearted game of checkers, but I couldn't focus. Every few minutes, Margaret would casually check her tablet under the table, shaking her head slightly each time. Lunch came and went. No response. By mid-afternoon, I was beginning to lose hope. "He's probably in court," Margaret reassured me. "Lawyers are busy people." "Or he thinks I've lost my mind," I replied bitterly. "Elderly woman claims son kidnapped her. Film at 11. Margaret fixed me with a stern look. "Stop that right now. Self-pity is a luxury you cannot afford." She was right, of course. I straightened my shoulders and nodded. It wasn't until after dinner, during the evening recreation hour, that Margaret's tablet finally pinged. We huddled together in the same corner, my heart pounding as she opened the email. "Mrs. Roberts, I'm deeply concerned by your message. To answer your questions. 1. Yes, you are still the legal owner of your property until a sale closes. 2. Without a power of attorney or guardianship order, Michael cannot legally sell your home without your signature on the closing documents. However, if he has documentation claiming you are incapacitated, he may be attempting to expedite guardianship proceedings. Time is critical. Once a sale closes, legal remedies become much more complicated. Please call my office at your earliest convenience, 555-823-4701. David Harmon, Esquire. I read the message twice, relief and dread washing over me in equal measure. I was still the legal owner, but only for now. 3 days, just 3 days before the open house, and who knew how quickly Michael would try to push through a sale after that. "Well," Margaret said quietly, "now we know where we stand." "And we know we're running out of time," I whispered. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of the ticking clock settled heavily on my shoulders. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to losing my home forever. I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, counting the hours until morning. A soft knock at my door startled me. It was nearly midnight. I opened it to find Margaret, still fully dressed, her eyes bright with determination. "I've been thinking," she whispered. "The staff computer at the front desk has a printer. If we could access it, we could print legal documents, maybe even a formal objection to the sale. But how would we?" The night receptionist takes a bathroom break at 12:15 every night, Margaret continued. I've been watching. She's gone for exactly 7 minutes. I stared at her. Margaret, are you suggesting we break into the main computer? Yes, that's exactly what I'm suggesting. She tapped her cane impatiently. Time isn't on our side. We need to act faster than email allows. The old me, the me from just 4 days ago, would have balked at such a suggestion. But that woman hadn't yet been betrayed by her own son, hadn't yet felt the sting of powerlessness. Okay, I said, surprising myself with my own resolve. What's the plan? Margaret's smile was small but fierce. Meet me in the hallway at 12:10. Wear your slippers. They're quieter. As she turned to go, I caught her arm. Margaret, why are you helping me? You barely know me. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Because 32 years as a librarian taught me one thing. Information is power, and no one deserves to have their power stripped away. She patted my hand. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we fight back. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face as he drove away with my keys. I saw my house, my home for 47 years, with a for sale sign stabbed into the front lawn. By morning, I felt hollow-eyed but strangely alert, like some survival instinct had kicked in, overriding my exhaustion. Margaret and I met for breakfast as usual, speaking in hushed tones between bites of rubbery scrambled eggs. Did you memorize the login information? I asked, stirring my coffee without drinking it. Username is Spadmin, and password is Sunshine 2023, Margaret replied without hesitation. The administrator types it in every morning while waiting for her coffee to brew. She has no idea I can see her keyboard from where I sit. I raised my eyebrows. You're a bit scary. You know that? Margaret winked. Librarians notice everything, dear. Now, are you ready for your part? Was I ready? My stomach churned at the thought of what we were about to do. If we were caught, they'd probably call Michael immediately, or worse, the police. What would happen then? Would they believe me, a supposedly confused old woman, over my successful, charming son? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Margaret leaned closer. Listen to me. That house isn't just wood and plaster. It's where you raised your family. It's where you loved your husband. It's your independence. She squeezed my hand. Some things are worth the risk. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. You're right. I'm ready. We spent the morning watching the staff patterns, noting when the administrator, Mrs. Winters, left her office for meetings. By 11:30, we had our timing down. Mrs. Winters always attended the daily staff meeting at noon, which lasted exactly 30 minutes. The hallway leading to the administrative offices was quietest then, with most residents at lunch. At 11:55, Margaret positioned herself near the nurse's station, her cane propped against the wall. I hovered nearby, pretending to admire a bland watercolor painting of flowers. Remember, Margaret whispered, you'll have about 20 minutes. The login should work. Send the email, then get out. I'll create enough commotion to keep them busy. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if they call an ambulance for you? Then I'll make a miraculous recovery. She smiled. I was in community theater for 20 years. Trust me, I can fake a convincing dizzy spell. The wall clock ticked to 12 o'clock. Mrs. Winters emerged from her office, locked the door, and headed toward the conference room. Margaret gave me a small nod. Then, with timing that deserved an Oscar, Margaret suddenly staggered, clutching her chest. Her cane clattered to the floor as she cried out, loud enough to echo down the hallway. Oh my, I can't. I feel so dizzy." She swayed dramatically, her hand fluttering to her forehead. The effect was immediate. 2 nurses rushed over, followed by an aide. Within seconds, a small crowd had gathered around Margaret, who was now seated in a chair, fanning herself weakly. "Blood pressure," one nurse called. "Get the kit." "Should we call Dr. Mendez?" another asked. Margaret moaned softly. "Everything's spinning." I didn't wait to see more. While all eyes were on Margaret's performance, I slipped down the hallway toward the administrative offices. Mrs. Winter's door was locked, but Margaret had prepared me for that too. The master key card she'd borrowed from a cleaning cart worked perfectly. Inside, the office was cool and quiet. The computer hummed on the desk, its screen dark. I sat in Mrs. Winter's chair, my fingers trembling as I typed in the login information Margaret had memorized. SP admin, Sunshine 2023. The screen flashed and I was in. My breath caught. I couldn't believe it had worked. Quickly, I opened the web browser and navigated to my email account. I typed in my lawyer's address and began composing the most important message of my life. "Mr. Harmon, this is urgent. Please prepare a deed transferring ownership of my home to a living trust in my name only, removing Michael as beneficiary. I am of sound mind and wish to protect my property from unauthorized sale. I will sign whatever documents necessary. Please call Sunny Pines at 555-78-29400 and ask to speak with me directly to confirm this request. Elizabeth Roberts." I hit send, then quickly forwarded the same message to his assistant's email for good measure. As the confirmation appeared, I heard voices in the hallway. My pulse spiked. I logged out of my email, then the computer, and pushed back from the desk. The voices grew closer. I froze, panic rising in my throat. Then I remembered Margaret, still out there creating her diversion. I couldn't let her down. I slipped out of the chair and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. The voices passed by, moving away from me. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door just enough to peek out. The hallway was clear. I stepped out, quietly pulled the door closed behind me, and walked as naturally as I could back toward the common areas. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to maintain a steady pace. When I rounded the corner, I saw Margaret sitting in a wheelchair, surrounded by concerned staff. She caught my eye for just a moment, and I gave her the slightest nod. Relief flickered across her face before she resumed her performance. "I think I'm feeling a little better now," she was saying. "Perhaps I just need to rest." My hands were shaking, but my eyes remained steady as I approached. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. I barely remember walking back to my room. The adrenaline that had carried me through our little heist was draining away, leaving my legs wobbly and my hands trembling. Margaret followed shortly after, having convinced the staff that her episode was just a combination of low blood sugar and standing up too quickly. "You should have seen their faces when I made my miraculous recovery," she chuckled, easing herself into the chair beside my bed. "I told them I just needed a cookie and some juice. They were so relieved they didn't have to fill out incident paperwork." I tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. The reality of what we'd done, what I'd done, was sinking in. I'd broken into an office, used a computer without permission. If they caught me, would they kick me out? And if they did, where would I even go? My house was about to be sold out from under me. What if he doesn't answer? I whispered, hugging myself. What if it's too late? Margaret reached over and patted my knee. Then we try something else. There's always another way. But I wasn't so sure. The walls of this tiny room seemed to close in a little tighter with each passing minute. I kept checking my watch, then remembering Mr. Harmon probably wouldn't even see my email until after lunch. Why don't you try to rest? Margaret suggested. I'll keep watch for a while. Rest? How could I possibly rest? But I lay back on the narrow bed anyway, staring at the ceiling, while Margaret pulled out a paperback mystery from her pocket. I must have dozed off despite everything, because I woke with a start when Margaret touched my shoulder. Elizabeth, she whispered, the nurse brought your tablet back. There's an email. I sat up so quickly my vision swam. Margaret handed me the tablet and my fingers fumbled with the screen, heart racing as I pulled up my email. There it was, a response from Mr. Harmon, sent just 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Roberts, I was deeply troubled to receive your email. I've reviewed the property records, and while there is indeed a listing for your home, no sale has been completed. You remain the legal owner of the property at 1742 Maple Street. However, I must caution you that without immediate action, your position could change within days. The open house is scheduled for tomorrow, and once a buyer makes an offer that Michael accepts as your representative, challenging it would require lengthy legal proceedings. I propose an unexpected but effective solution. Sell the house yourself immediately before Michael can complete his transaction. My niece, Jennifer Harmon, is a licensed real estate agent. She could purchase the property for a nominal amount $1 as a legal placeholder, then transfer it into a living trust with you as the sole beneficiary. This would effectively block any attempt by Michael to sell the property, as you would have already exercised your rights as the legal owner. Time is of the essence. Please call my office at your earliest convenience to discuss this option. Yours sincerely, Robert Harmon, Esquire. I read the email twice, then handed the tablet to Margaret, my hands shaking too much to hold it steady. Well, I'll be, she murmured after reading it. That's quite the chess move. Sell my house? My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. For $1? Not really selling it, Margaret pointed out. More like putting it somewhere safe where Michael can't touch it. I stood up and paced the small room, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. The walls felt even closer now. Sell my house, the home Frank and I had bought when we were barely more than newlyweds. The home where Michael had taken his first steps, where Frank had planted the maple tree that now towered over the back garden, where I'd nursed both of them through chicken pox and flu, and, in Frank's case, the long, slow decline of cancer. It feels wrong, I said, like I'm giving it away. Margaret set the tablet down. What happens if you don't? The question hung in the air between us. I knew the answer. If I didn't act, Michael would sell it to strangers. All those memories would be bulldozed away for someone else's dream home or investment property, and I would be left with nothing but this tiny room and the bitter knowledge that my own son had decided I was disposable. I stopped pacing and looked out the window. From here, I could just see the tops of trees beyond the parking lot. Somewhere out there was my garden, probably already going wild without my daily attention. My kitchen, where the afternoon light streamed in just right. My bedroom, with the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding. If I do nothing, I lose everything, I said quietly. Yes. And if I do this dollar sale, I might get it all back. That seems to be the plan, Margaret said. It's clever, legal jujitsu. I took a deep breath. The choice really wasn't a choice at all. It was the difference between certainty and possibility, between surrender and fighting back. We do it, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. We do it now. Margaret smiled, a slow, satisfied curve of her lips. That's the spirit. I picked up the tablet again, my hands steadier now. I'll need to call Mr. Harmon. Can you help me figure out how to make a private call from here? Already thought of that, Margaret said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a cell phone. My grandson insists I carry this, says it's for emergencies. She winked at me. I'd say this qualifies, wouldn't you? I took the phone, feeling a surge of gratitude for this fierce woman who'd appeared in my life just when I needed her most. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. Save your thanks for when we win, she replied. Now make that call. I called Mr. Harmon from Margaret's phone, stepping into the tiny bathroom for privacy. My heart pounded as I explained who I was. Mrs. Wilson, I'm glad you reached out, he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it from when he'd helped with Frank's estate. I can have the paperwork ready within the hour. Can you receive digital documents? I glanced at the bathroom door, thinking of Margaret and her tablet. Yes, I can. Good. Time is critical here. I'll need you to sign and return everything tonight. My niece Jennifer is standing by to complete her part of the transaction. $1, I said, still unable to wrap my mind around it. My house for $1. A legal necessity, Mrs. Wilson. The amount doesn't matter. What matters is creating a valid transaction that precedes whatever your son is attempting. He paused. I should warn you, this will likely damage your relationship with Michael. I leaned against the cool tile wall. He damaged it first when he abandoned me here and tried to sell my home out from under me. Fair point, I'll send everything shortly. When I emerged, Margaret was waiting expectantly. Well, it's happening, I said, tonight. The paperwork arrived in Mr. Harmon's email just after dinner. Margaret and I huddled in her room, poring over the documents on her tablet. The legal language swam before my eyes, but the intent was clear. I was transferring ownership of my home to Jennifer Harmon for the sum of $1, with the understanding that she would immediately place it in a trust with me as the beneficiary. We need to print these, Margaret said. Sunny Pines has a printer in their activities room for residents. I've seen them use it. Will they let us? Margaret's eyes twinkled. They will if we say we're printing recipes for the cooking class tomorrow. And somehow it worked. The young activity coordinator barely looked up from her phone as we printed the documents. My hands trembled as I signed each page, Margaret witnessing with her bold, looping signature. What now? I asked as we stared at the stack of papers. Now we scan them back to your lawyer, Margaret said. Same excuse, recipes we want to share with family. Back we went to the activities room. The coordinator sighed but helped us scan the documents. I watched the pages feed through, feeling strangely disconnected from what was happening. This was my home, my life, being processed through a machine and sent away in digital bits. It's done, Margaret whispered as we walked back to our rooms. You've taken back control. That night I received a brief confirmation from Mr. Harmon. Sale completed. Jennifer will file the deed first thing tomorrow morning. Courier will come for the original documents at 9 a.m. I barely slept, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. Had I done the right thing? What would Michael say when he found out? I imagined his face, first confusion, then anger. Would he understand why I'd done it? Would he ever forgive me? Did I even want his forgiveness? Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the thin curtains. I dressed carefully, choosing my blue cardigan, the one Frank always said brought out my eyes. It felt important to look composed, dignified. At precisely 9 a.m., the front desk called. "Mrs. Wilson, there's a courier here for you." I met the young man in the lobby, a manila envelope clutched in my hands. He barely looked at me as he scanned a barcode, had me sign an electronic pad, and took the envelope. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," he confirmed, already turning away. I stood in the lobby watching him walk out the automatic doors. It felt anticlimactic somehow. My house, the center of my life for over 40 years, had just legally changed hands for less money than a cup of coffee, and the whole transaction had taken less than 30 seconds. Margaret was waiting for me when I returned to the dining area. "Well?" "It's done," I said, sinking into the chair beside her. "Really done." She patted my hand. "Now we wait." The day crawled by. I couldn't focus on anything. Not the book I tried to read, not the television program in the common room, not even lunch. All I could think about was Michael, arriving at my house with real estate agents and prospective buyers, confident in his plan. "What time did you say the open house was scheduled for?" Margaret asked as we picked at our dinner. 2 o'clock, I said. "It's been hours now." "He might not know yet," she pointed out. "These things take time to process." I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something should have happened by now. Shouldn't Michael have called, furious and demanding explanations? Shouldn't someone from Sunny Pines have come to tell me I had an urgent phone call? As we finished dinner, my stomach in knots, Margaret's phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at it, and handed it to me. "It's a text from your lawyer," she said. I took the phone with shaking hands and read, "Deed filed successfully this morning. Michael's agent attempted to proceed with open house, but was served with notice of the change in ownership. Property is now secure in the trust. Call me when convenient to discuss next steps." "He knows," I whispered. "Michael knows what I've done." Friday morning arrived with a strange sense of calm settling over me. I'd barely slept, but somehow felt more alert than I had in days. Margaret appeared at my door just before 10, carrying her tablet and a knowing smile. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach churned with anticipation. As ready as I'll ever be. We settled in Margaret's room, which was slightly larger than mine and faced away from the morning sun. She propped her tablet against a stack of books on her small table and tapped the screen a few times. "Your lawyer's paralegal is brilliant," Margaret said, adjusting the angle. "She's set up a small camera in your living room window, perfectly legal since it's filming your own property. We should be able to see the driveway and front door." The live stream connected, showing my familiar front yard. The rose bushes needed pruning. I'd been planning to do that before Michael had whisked me away. The sight of my home made my throat tighten. "What time did you say he'd be there?" Margaret asked, checking her watch. "The open house was scheduled for 2, but Mr. Harmon said they'd likely arrive earlier to set up." I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It's almost 11 now. We waited, making small talk about nothing important. Margaret offered me tea, which I accepted but barely touched. Every few minutes, my eyes darted back to the tablet screen, showing my empty driveway. At 11:43, I remember checking the time on Margaret's bedside clock. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway. My breath caught. "That's Michael's car," I whispered. 2 more vehicles followed, a white SUV with a real estate company logo on the side and a silver sedan I didn't recognize. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Michael stepped out first, dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks. He looked confident, almost smug as he waited for the others. A woman in a bright red blazer emerged from the SUV, the realtor, I presumed, and a middle-aged couple from the sedan. "Potential buyers," Margaret murmured. "Look how he's smiling at them." Indeed, Michael was all charm, shaking hands with the couple, gesturing toward the house with broad, welcoming movements. I could almost hear his sales pitch, the same house I'd lovingly maintained for decades, reduced to square footage and investment potential. The group approached the front door, Michael leading the way. Then he stopped so abruptly that the realtor nearly bumped into him. "He's seen it," I breathed. Mr. Harmon had arranged for a legal notice to be posted prominently on the front door. Even from our distant vantage point, the bright orange paper was unmistakable. Michael stepped closer, reading it, his body language shifting from confidence to confusion. "What's happening?" the realtor asked, moving to stand beside him. I couldn't hear her words, but her body language was clear, professional concern turning to alarm. Michael ripped the notice from the door, scanning it more closely. I watched his shoulders tense, his free hand clenching into a fist. He turned to the realtor, gesticulating wildly, pointing at the paper and then at the house. "Oh my," Margaret said softly. "He's not taking it well, is he?" The potential buyers were hanging back now, exchanging uncomfortable glances. The woman touched her husband's arm, and they began retreating toward their car. Michael noticed and hurried after them, still clutching the notice. He was talking rapidly, his free hand cutting through the air. The couple shook their heads, continuing their retreat. The realtor stood frozen by the front door, phone pressed to her ear. "They're leaving," I said, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness washing over me. "They know something's wrong." As the buyer's car backed out of the driveway, the front door of my house opened. Mr. Harmon stepped out onto the porch, his familiar figure straight-backed and calm. He'd told me he would be there, but seeing him actually standing in my doorway, defending my home, brought tears to my eyes. Michael spun around at the movement, storming back toward the house. Even without audio, I could tell he was shouting. Mr. Harmon remained composed, hands clasped in front of him, letting Michael's fury break against him like waves on a seawall. "Your lawyer has nerves of steel," Margaret commented, squeezing my hand. The realtor joined them on the porch, looking between the two men with growing alarm. Mr. Harmon handed her what appeared to be a document, likely proof of the new ownership. She studied it, her professional mask slipping as she turned to Michael with what could only be accusations. Michael's rage seemed to double. He jabbed a finger toward Mr. Harmon, then toward the street where the buyers had disappeared. The realtor shook her head, gathering her portfolio closer to her chest and backing away. "She's leaving too," I said, watching as the woman hurried to her SUV. "The deal is falling apart right in front of him." Michael stood alone on the porch now, facing Mr. Harmon. His shoulders slumped briefly before squaring again with renewed anger. He pulled out his phone, jabbing at it furiously. Seconds later, Margaret's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "It's Sunny Pine's front desk." "He's calling me," I whispered, a chill running through me. He knows I did this. Margaret silenced the ringer. You don't have to talk to him when he's like this. Let him cool down first. On the screen, Michael was still on the phone, pacing back and forth on my porch. Mr. Harmon remained in the doorway, a steadfast guardian. When Michael's call clearly went unanswered, he threw his hands up in frustration, turning back to Mr. Harmon with renewed vigor. I wish we could hear what they're saying, Margaret murmured. I don't need to hear, I replied softly. I know exactly what Michael is saying. He's demanding to know how I could do this to him. He's saying the house should be his. He's saying I had no right. We watched as Michael's tirade continued, his body language growing more agitated with each passing moment. Mr. Harmon remained unflappable, occasionally shaking his head or gesturing calmly. Finally, Michael stormed back to his car, yanked open the door, and slammed it behind him. He sat there for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, before starting the engine and backing out with unnecessary speed. He's gone, I said, feeling strangely hollow as I watched his car disappear from view. It's over. Mr. Harmon looked directly at the camera then, giving a small, reassuring nod before stepping back inside and closing the door. Not quite over, Margaret corrected gently. But you've won the first battle. I had just finished lunch with Margaret when the receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. Mrs. Henderson, you have a visitor in the main lobby. Mrs. Henderson to the main lobby, please. My stomach dropped. I knew who it was before the receptionist even finished speaking. The timing was too perfect, barely 3 hours since he'd stormed away from my house. He's here, I whispered to Margaret, my hands suddenly cold. Michael. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Are you ready to face him? Was I? My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to hide in my room, to avoid the confrontation entirely, but I'd come too far to cower now. I think so, I said, smoothing down my cardigan with trembling fingers. Will you come with me? Try and stop me, Margaret replied, gripping her cane as she rose. I've been wanting to meet this son of yours. We made our way slowly toward the lobby, my legs feeling heavier with each step. The closer we got, the more clearly I could hear Michael's voice, sharp, demanding, echoing off the institutional walls. I need to see her now. This is an emergency. She's not well. She's making irrational decisions. I paused just around the corner, gathering my courage. Margaret gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Remember, she murmured, you're the one with the power now. I took a deep breath and rounded the corner. Michael was leaning over the reception desk, his back to me. His shoulders were tight with tension, his hand slicing through the air as he spoke. The young receptionist looked overwhelmed, her eyes darting around for help. I'm right here, Michael, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He whirled around. His face was flushed, his tie askew, so unlike his usual polished appearance. For a moment he looked like the little boy who'd throw tantrums when he didn't get his way. But there was nothing childlike about the cold fury in his eyes. What have you done? He demanded, striding toward me. Have you lost your mind? Selling the house for $1? $1? I'd like to speak with my son privately, I told the receptionist, who looked relieved to be removed from the situation. Is the visitor lounge available? Of course, Mrs. Henderson, she replied, gesturing down the hall. Michael followed me, his anger radiating like heat. Margaret walked beside me, her presence a silent shield. Who is this? Michael snapped, glaring at Margaret. A friend, I replied simply as we entered the empty lounge. Someone who actually cares about what I want. Michael scoffed. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You can't just sell the family home, our home, without consulting me. I'm your son. And I'm your mother, I said, lowering myself into an armchair. Not your property. This is elder abuse, Michael declared, pacing the room. Someone's manipulated you. Was it this woman? He jabbed a finger toward Margaret. Or that snake of a lawyer? I'm going to challenge this in court. You're clearly not mentally competent. Margaret's eyebrows shot up, but before she could speak, I pulled out my phone. I thought you might say something like that, I said, my finger hovering over the screen. That's why I asked Mr. Harmon to be available this afternoon. I dialed, and Mr. Harmon answered on the first ring. I put him on speaker. Mrs. Henderson, I'm here. Is everything all right? My son is here, I explained. He seems to think I'm not mentally sound and wants to challenge the sale. Michael stepped closer, leaning toward the phone. This is Michael Henderson. What happened yesterday was completely illegal. My mother is not in her right mind. She's been in this facility less than a week, and suddenly she's making financial decisions that make no sense. She needs protection from people taking advantage of her. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Harmon's voice was calm but firm. I've represented your mother for 15 years. In that time, I've never had any reason to question her mental acuity or decision-making abilities. In fact, when she contacted me this week, she was remarkably clear about her situation and her wishes. She sold her house for $1, Michael shouted. She sold her house to protect it from being sold without her consent, Mr. Harmon corrected. A perfectly rational decision under the circumstances. Michael's face contorted. She doesn't need protection. I was selling it for her own good. She can't maintain that place anymore. Did you discuss this with her before listing it? Mr. Harmon asked. Michael hesitated, and in that moment his case crumbled. I was going to tell her after I had some interested buyers. So you listed your mother's property for sale without her knowledge or consent while she remained the legal owner? Mr. Harmon's voice had taken on the precise tone I'd heard him use in negotiations. Mr. Henderson, your mother had every right to protect her assets. In fact, I'd go so far as to say her actions demonstrate exceptional clarity and foresight. Michael turned to me, his expression shifting from anger to something closer to desperation. Mom, please. This is our family home. Dad built it for us. You can't just give it away. I'm not giving it away, I said quietly. I'm keeping it safe until I decide what I want to do with it. My decision, Michael, not yours. This is ridiculous. Michael's voice rose again. I'm calling Adult Protective Services. I'm getting a lawyer. You can't do this. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Harmon interjected. I strongly advise against making unfounded claims about your mother's mental capacity. Such accusations, when proven false, can have serious consequences, including potential countersuits for defamation and emotional distress. Michael stared at the phone, then at me, then at Margaret, who hadn't said a word but sat watching him with clear disapproval. This isn't over, he finally said, his voice low and threatening. You've made a huge mistake. He stormed toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I was only trying to help you, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You'll regret this. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the quiet room. From down the hall, I could hear his footsteps, hard and fast, and then his voice again, not words, just an inarticulate sound of frustration that bounced off the walls. Then silence. I sat on the edge of my Sunny Pines bed the next morning, staring at the phone in my hands. It had been buzzing with texts and calls since dawn, not from Michael, but from friends I hadn't heard from in days. "Did you really outsmart your son?" Judith, my garden club friend, had written. "The whole real estate office is talking about it." I hadn't told anyone what happened. How did they know? Margaret knocked and entered without waiting, her cane tapping a cheerful rhythm against the linoleum. "You're famous," she announced, waving her tablet. "Or rather, your son is infamous." She sat beside me and showed me a neighborhood social media group where someone had posted, "Did anyone else hear about Michael Henderson trying to sell his mother's house behind her back? And she sold it first? Classic." My stomach tightened. "I didn't want this to become public," I murmured. Margaret patted my hand. "You didn't make it public, dear. He did. These things have a way of getting out, especially when someone makes a fool of themselves." I scrolled through more comments. People I barely knew were weighing in. Always thought he was too slick for his own good. Heard he's been telling potential clients his mother has dementia. Disgusting. My cousin works at Meridian Realty and says the boss is furious. Something about reputation damage. The thought of Michael's humiliation brought me no joy. This was my son, the little boy who once brought me dandelions and told me they were sunshine flowers. How had we come to this? "Mr. Harmon called," Margaret said, breaking into my thoughts. "The trust paperwork is complete. The house is officially yours again, protected in a trust that Michael can't touch." I nodded, relief washing through me. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," she said with a wink. "Thank me when we're having tea in your living room." That afternoon, Charla helped me pack my few belongings into the small suitcase I'd never unpacked fully. My hands trembled slightly as I folded my nightgown. "You're really leaving us?" Charla asked, her voice tinged with genuine disappointment. "Most folks don't check out after just a week." "Most folks choose to come here," I replied, then softened my tone. "You've been kind, Charla, but this isn't where I belong. Not yet." She nodded. "I heard about what your son tried to do. Word travels fast in places like this." She hesitated. "My brother-in-law works at Crosstown Realty. Says Michael's become something of a cautionary tale." I winced. "What do you mean?" "Well," Charla looked uncomfortable. "Apparently his boss called him in yesterday, gave him a formal warning about ethical conduct and conflict of interest. Said they can't have agents who put personal gain above client interests, especially when the client is family." I sank onto the bed. I never wanted to damage his career. "Honey, you didn't damage anything," Charla said firmly. "He did that all by himself." Later that afternoon, Mr. Harmon's niece Elaine arrived to drive me home. She was a slender woman with her uncle's kind eyes and practical manner. "The trust is ironclad," she assured me as we drove. "Your son can't touch the house without your explicit permission, even if he tried to claim you're incapacitated." "Has he tried to contact you?" I asked. Elaine's mouth tightened. "He called our office yesterday. Uncle Richard didn't take the call." "And his reputation? Is it really as bad as people are saying?" She glanced at me, then back at the road. "I don't want to upset you. Please, I need to know." Elaine sighed. Real estate is a small world, Mrs. Henderson. Word gets around when someone tries to pull something like this, especially when it backfires so completely. Will he lose his job? My voice was barely audible. I don't think so, but trust is everything in this business. It might be a while before people trust him with their biggest asset. I gazed out the window at the familiar streets passing by. Was this justice? It didn't feel like victory. It felt like sadness, a mother's sadness for a son who'd lost his way. When we pulled into my driveway, I felt a surge of emotion so powerful I had to sit still for a moment before I could open the car door. My house, my home, still mine. Elaine helped me carry my suitcase inside. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, the cushions still bearing the imprint of where I'd sat, my half-finished novel still on the side table, my reading glasses perched on top. I'll leave you to settle in, Elaine said. Uncle Richard will call tomorrow to check on you. After she left, I walked slowly through each room, touching furniture, straightening pictures, reacquainting myself with the space that had held my life for 43 years. In the kitchen, I found a note on the counter in Margaret's handwriting. Stocked your refrigerator. Call me when you're ready for that tea. M. I opened the fridge to find milk, eggs, bread, and a small chocolate cake with welcome home written in wobbly icing. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Not tears of joy or relief, but something more complex, gratitude mingled with grief. I'd regained my home and my dignity, but at what cost to my relationship with my son? As I put the kettle on for tea, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Henderson? A woman's voice. This is Patricia Winters from Crosstown Realty. I was wondering if we could talk about your son, Michael. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my home around me like a protective embrace. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, in my own home. I stood at my front door, key in hand, after Elaine drove away. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to turn the lock. What if this wasn't real? What if I'd wake up back in that narrow bed at Sunny Pines, staring at institutional beige walls? This is your home, I whispered to myself. Your home. My fingers trembled as I slid the key in. The familiar click of the lock turning brought tears to my eyes. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, breathing in the scent that no one else would recognize as special, the particular mixture of lemon furniture polish, old books, and the lavender sachets I'd tucked into every drawer for 40 years. I set my small suitcase down in the entryway and just stood there taking it all in. The grandfather clock that had been my wedding gift from Edward's parents still ticked steadily in the corner. The worn spot on the hallway carpet where I'd paced during Edward's final illness was still visible. The sunlight still slanted through the living room windows at exactly the right angle to illuminate the family photos on the mantel. I'm home, I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. I walked from room to room, trailing my fingers along furniture edges, straightening a picture frame, plumping a cushion. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, and yet something felt different. Perhaps it was me. I wasn't the same woman who had trustingly gotten into Michael's car with flowers in her arms. In the kitchen, I noticed something new. 3 small terracotta pots on the windowsill above the sink, each containing a miniature lavender plant. A small card was propped against them. Every home needs something living and fragrant. Margaret. I touched one of the soft purple blooms and brought my fingers to my nose. The scent was clean and soothing, When had she arranged this? Margaret was turning out to be full of surprises. That first night alone, I slept in my own bed with a profound gratitude I'd never felt before. The familiar dip in the mattress, the weight of my own quilt, the moonlight casting the same shadow pattern on my ceiling, all of it felt like a miracle. The next morning, I made coffee in my own kitchen, using my favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle that I'd refused to throw away, because Edward had given it to me on our 30th anniversary. I carried it out to the back porch and sat watching the birds at the feeder, feeling the sun warm my face. Throughout Saturday, I reacquainted myself with my home. I opened windows to let fresh air circulate. I watered my neglected houseplants, apologizing to each one. I ran my hands over Edward's books in the study, straightened the doilies my mother had crocheted on the end tables, and folded the throw blankets just so. With each small act, I felt myself reclaiming not just the space, but my life within it. This wasn't just a house with walls and a roof. It was the container for my memories, my history, my sense of self. I watered the lavender plants on the kitchen windowsill, noticing how the afternoon light caught the tiny droplets on their leaves. "Thank you, Margaret," I said to the empty kitchen. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. I was having my second cup of tea when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret standing on my porch, a canvas tote bag over her arm and her cane in hand. "You found me," I said, swinging the door open. "Not hard to do when you gave me your address," she replied with a wink. "May I come in?" "Please," I said, stepping back. "I've been looking forward to showing you my home." Margaret stepped inside, her bright eyes taking everything in. "Well, this is certainly worth fighting for," she said approvingly. "It has character, like its owner." I gave her the tour, watching her face as she admired Edward's book collection and the quilt my grandmother had made that hung on the dining room wall. She nodded at the lavender plants when we reached the kitchen. "I see they survived," she said. "They're perfect," I told her. "How did you manage it?" "I have my ways," she said mysteriously, "and friends who owe me favors. Now, how about that tea you promised me?" I put the kettle on while Margaret unpacked her tote bag. Out came a loaf of banana bread, still warm, and 3 paperback mysteries. "I thought you might need some reading material," she said, "and sustenance." We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs, sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the lavender plants. Margaret told me stories about her years as a librarian, about the rare books she'd handled and the eccentric patrons she'd befriended. I laughed more than I had in weeks. "Do you know," I said, cutting us each a second slice of banana bread, "this is the first time I've felt like the ground beneath me is truly solid again." Margaret reached across the table and patted my hand. "That's because it is your ground now, legally, practically, emotionally, all yours." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "You had the courage. I just provided a tablet and a distraction." We laughed again, and I realized how much I'd missed this simple friendship, conversation without agenda, the comfort of another person who wanted nothing from me except my company. "To new friends," I said, raising my teacup. "And to old homes," Margaret added, touching her cup to mine. The afternoon stretched pleasantly before us, filled with stories and laughter and the scent of lavender from the windowsill. For the first time since Michael had driven away with my keys, I felt completely at peace. This was my home, these were my choices, and this new friendship was a gift I hadn't expected but deeply treasured. The days slipped into weeks like water flowing into a still pond, quiet, measured, and strangely peaceful. Michael never called, not once. No apologetic voicemails, no awkward text messages, no surprise visits with more flowers and false smiles. His absence was a gift I hadn't expected, but came to appreciate more with each passing day. "Good riddance," Margaret said when she visited for our weekly tea. "Some bridges deserve to burn." I wasn't sure if I agreed entirely. He was still my son, after all. The little boy who'd once brought me dandelions and fallen asleep against my shoulder during thunderstorms. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized or trusted. "I keep thinking he might try again," I admitted to Margaret. "Come back with some new scheme." She shook her head firmly. "Not likely. Men like that don't circle back once they've been publicly humiliated. His pride won't let him." I hoped she was right. The trust my lawyer had established was ironclad, but my heart wasn't quite as secure. As spring deepened into summer, I settled into my new rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the back porch, watching cardinals and chickadees squabble at the feeder. I'd planted a small vegetable garden, just 3 raised beds with tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, but tending it gave my days structure and purpose. "Not bad for a woman who was supposed to be warehoused in Sunny Pines," I told the fat robin who watched me weed one morning. My neighbor Ellen stopped by occasionally, bringing homemade bread or just conversation. She never asked directly about Michael or why I'd disappeared for those 2 weeks, but I could see the questions in her eyes. "Family matters," I said vaguely when she finally worked up the courage to inquire. "All sorted now." That became my standard response to the few who dared ask. Family matters, all sorted now. The perfect balance of acknowledgement and dismissal. I installed a small sign beside my front door. No soliciting. It wasn't just for the occasional salespeople or political canvassers. It was a boundary, a declaration. This house was mine, and I decided who crossed its threshold. Margaret laughed when she saw it. "Subtle," she said, tapping it with one finger as she arrived for lunch. "I thought so," I replied, ushering her inside. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine, Margaret and I. She came over most Thursdays, bringing books she thought I'd enjoy or recipes she wanted to try. Sometimes we ventured out, to a small museum exhibit or a garden center, but mostly we stayed in, talking for hours at my kitchen table. "How's the lavender doing?" she asked one afternoon as I poured her tea. I glanced at the windowsill where the plants had flourished, their slender purple spikes reaching toward the sun. "Thriving. I've been drying some for sachets." "Your house always smells like lavender now," she observed. "It suits you." She was right. The gentle scent had become part of my home's identity, and mine too, perhaps. Subtle but persistent, unassuming but impossible to ignore completely. On laundry days, I folded sheets and towels near the open window, letting the breeze carry that lavender scent through the clean cotton. Such a simple pleasure, but one I never took for granted anymore. The ability to wash my own clothes in my own machine and fold them in my own home, these were victories in their own quiet way. I never went public with my story. No dramatic social media posts exposing Michael's betrayal. No interviews with local news. No community-wide scandal. The only people who knew the full truth were Margaret, my lawyer, and Michael himself. That was enough. "Don't you want people to know what he tried to do?" Margaret asked once, curious rather than pushy. I considered this as I sipped my tea, watching a hummingbird dart among my petunias. What would be the point I finally answered. Humiliating him further won't undo what happened, and I don't need public vindication to know I won. Because I had won. Not just legally, but in every way that mattered. I'd reclaimed my home, my independence, my dignity. I'd discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, and I'd found a friendship that enriched my days immeasurably. Some afternoons when the house was quiet and the sun slanted just so through the living room windows, I'd sit in Edward's old chair and let myself remember everything. The shock of Michael's betrayal, the despair of those first nights at Sunny Pines, the fierce determination that had propelled me through our desperate plan. The memories no longer stung as they once had. They were just part of my story now. My new normal wasn't perfect. There was still a Michael-shaped hole in my life that ached sometimes, especially on holidays or when I came across old family photos. But the peace I'd found was real and sustaining. I didn't need applause or recognition. The quiet satisfaction of sitting in my own home, drinking tea scented with lavender from my windowsill, was victory enough. If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Was victory enough? If you enjoyed this story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.